Cool. Okay. So I wanted to start with some feedback from the meeting at NREL. So Zara, a few of us, many of the people here went to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They are doing a lot in the clean energy space, including putting solar panels and electric vehicles. They're basically the national lab in the United States that deals with renewable energy. And so their role in this transition is large. And I put a couple of the things that Adam Warren sent me in the drive, and there's a connection there now. And so I just wanted to maybe not spend a huge amount of time rehashing that visit, but just to bring forward anything that people would like us to follow up on now or soon. What should be on our list?
I think you already know this. To me, like they seemed really excited about developing like workshop type thing, which like if we have that traveling roadshow that we need to do, I think we need to involve them in that. That was like one of the main takeaways.
Are you referring to the ACEEE?
Yeah, and if not that, something else, like, you know, to have a group like that says, hey, yes, we'd love to like meet up at a conference. Like it seems if we're going to organize these things, they're a group we need to be inviting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the ACEEE was only one, right? We're supposed to have some other ones, so we should let them know. Seems like we should be developing a mailing list of interested parties, because Stacy is, of course, spinning up her work. And I thought, I'm hoping Stacy will be here because I wanted her to comment on the discussion about the interviews, because she's going to be having an advisory group. So it seems like there's going to be a lot of people that we touch, and we should keep them updated. Anyone else want to follow up on anything immediate? Kartik, I don't know if you got any feedback from Narasimha, because he hasn't been back yet, right?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything from him yet.
Okay, maybe we should also take this discussion up next week when he's here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be at the next meeting, but I'll put it on the agenda. Okay, and then I wanted to introduce Zara, who's coming to CSU as a systems engineering student. I haven't quite sorted out what all the roles will be, and I'll be talking to some of you about that. Zara, do you want to say something about yourself? Are you there? She's been freezing.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, do you want to say something about yourself?
Hi, everyone. Yes. Do you have my voice and picture again?
You're good. Do you want to say something about the work you've been doing?
Yes. First, hi everyone.
I'm not sure our connection is really great. So maybe we can go into Adam's getting to know you. Hey, Zara, I think your connection isn't very good. It's like
yes,
we don't hear you. So, but I will tell you that often in our meetings, we do a getting to know you where everybody says something about themselves, and Adam is going to lead that today. And so this is a way you can get to know us instead of doing lots of introductions. I hope you can hear.
I believe I believe I can say hello to everyone, and I will, if everything goes as planned, I join the group for fall semesters. I work as a data scientist and R&D researcher in the field of agricultural engineering and smart agricultural. And my work mostly working on the data science side of the projects. And nice to meet you all.
Great, thank you. And
Uh,
Adam,
if-
take it away. And Zara, you can participate and you'll see how we do this.
yes, thank you.
Can't hear you, Adam. Can't read your lips either. I'm not that talented. Yeah, no, you don't look muted to me either. Adam, you want to put your question in the chat and put an order in the chat, and then while you're sorting out the technology, we can be answering.
Yeah, can you hear me with this microphone?
Yay!
Oh, excellent. Okay. Sorry, I don't know what keeps happening. Well, I should preface this by saying that I hope this question doesn't trigger any prior traumas. But I'm curious to know, I thought this might be kind of fun, if there's been a time where you've received criticism on your work that at first you thought was maybe incorrect or off base, but then on reflection you thought, okay, they really have a point. For us who who write peer-reviewed articles, I think we probably have examples of that. But if you have something, if that's not your background, then maybe you have another example of that kind of thing. And I'll just go. Sure. Let me fix the order then. Let's go in this order. I'll just write it out. I can go first too if that's easier. If that's
Tried to phrase your.
what's that?
I put your question in the chat, and you want to go last. Okay.
Yeah, hold on. I'm gonna rewrite the order then in here.
Everybody can line up to go last.
I can go first if it's helpful, just to kind of, I have a couple examples. They're both from, submitting peer reviewed papers early in graduate school. I tried to, I knew I needed to publish, so I just tried to write stuff and submit it on my own to journals. And, this was like first year PhD, and I get these really harsh reviews back. And, at the time it was very upsetting. I thought this stuff isn't that bad. But I'm sure right now, if I read one of those pieces, there may be 2 or 3 pieces that I just never tried to publish, that I just gave up on after a couple journals. I'd probably think, wow, this is absolutely awful. And there were also, a few pieces that I submitted during the kind of height of the pandemic that I get reviews back, and they would talk about how they were full of spelling errors and all, kind of amateurish mistakes. And I think this can't be right. But then I'd go back and actually read the article after revising it, particularly once the kids got back in school. And I realized that, writing at 4 a.m. or whatever it was, I was definitely not at my best. And they were certainly right. That there were an unacceptable amount of typos and just kind of run-on sentences and formatting problems and things like that. So I've had that situation several times where upon a second reflection, there was maybe some substance to the critiques that I was receiving, even though perhaps initially I thought that there wasn't. So there's no order, if that's okay.
All right, looks like it's me. The first one that comes to mind is kind of early on when I was a practice manager of a vet hospital. So I was developing our public education information to go out to community events. And I didn't appropriately tailor the language to be what our target audience was. it was definitely using too much of kind of background knowledge that I had from school and not taking into account that other people didn't already have that. And so that was a really good lesson for me to learn that, you know, you have to tailor it to whatever audience you're trying to get it to if you want the information to be useful. Because at first I was like, but this is correct. But it was correct, it just wasn't for the right audience.
So I've written a couple of articles that are somewhat long, and my first one, no, was it the first? I don't know. So I wrote a review of the optical properties of particles that was trying to sort out how much light does black carbon absorb and scatter. And it was pretty comprehensive. And my co-author and I decided to ask like the guy in the field who wrote the book, literally wrote the book called Absorption and Scattering by Small Particles, to review it. And I guess my co-author knew him slightly. So this guy wrote very carefully a really blistering review, like, and there were a few technical comments, but there was also like, he just criticized my, like, the writing, like, this is terrible. He did not hold back. And so at first I was like, you know, like, how can you be so mean? And then when I started addressing every one of them, I you know, I could see he did have a point. And I would say, I think a lot of us have been like the better writers in our class, but that's not the same as being a good writer. And so your high school teacher was like happy with you because your essay was better than the other crappy writers, but it's still not good. That experience was transformative for me because I had to like address the fundamental problems with writing and really challenge myself. And I wrote to him, I don't know, 10 or 15 years later, saying how meaningful that had been. He wrote a 30-page review and I answered like every single one of these. And just to have to do that was, I think, it was really good for me. And I wish I had more critical partners like that.
I'm like struggling to think. Oh, I'm not next. Never mind. I thought I was next. Daisy, go for it.
Totally fine to be skipped over though.
Tough question here, Adam.
Tough question. I don't know. I feel like this happens to me like all the time, but it's because I'm constantly writing, like whether it's program manuals or requests for qualifications. These are just some that are like recent work products I've been working on. And in my, it's a great question. And in my new unit, I feel like I've been struggling with this actually more than ever. It's never, not that it's never happened before that there hasn't been good feedback, but the extent to which my new unit operates by massive edits to documentation is just kind of something that I'm dealing with right now. Criticism of work that you first thought was off base. I always think it's off base. I always feel really connected to like, I wrote this was my baby. Like I worked on this, I spent time on it. How can anyone criticize it? But usually I guess after a couple of days or an hour, you just sort of say, you know, it's okay. It's not an authored paper. I don't write a lot of authored paper. I don't get to actually have that like sense of like, I really relate to this. It is a collective work. And I can see the value in others' opinions. Good question. I hate your question. Thanks for asking it.
I agree that I could like talk, there's like, this happens all the time to me. It's like, no, that's not right. But like the thing that I think of like that I have the most like, you are just wrong response this way actually isn't like research stuff. Cause like I expect to be wrong when I do research, but like teaching reviews, I always take like really personally. And then I think about it and my students are almost always right. Like they're always like, Dr. Scott is terrible at returning emails. And it's like, well, that's not true. I'm great at returning emails and I'm terrible at returning emails. Like it's 100% true. Or like Dr. Scott isn't very well organized. It's like, well, that's true. I need to be better at organization. And it's like this every year I feel like I read my teaching reviews and it's like the first day I'm like, well, the students are all just wrong. And then I think about it and it's like, no, students did a good job yet again of assessing me as a teacher. I just need to get better. So.
Oh, Adam, I have some really hard gossip. So I just got an email earlier this week from somebody who read one of our preprint papers. So I'm just going to read directly from the email. So it says, dear, this is to the lead author, I'm just somewhere in there. So it's like, dear XXX, I was reading the preprint, blah, blah, blah. And in the most polite and friendly way, I would like to warn you about table 3, that in my opinion is nonsense. This is scientific opinion, just that all your machine learning studies are useless because we still do not know what good data is to feed them. So you've just fed in garbage in and garbage out, according to me, with no basis. I really hope you take this as friendly advice from somebody who really knows theory. Best regards. So, so yeah, still in denial stage. I don't really know what to respond. That is nothing. So I'm just kind of shell shocked at this point. So yeah.
Well, actually, as I was hearing that email, I had, I guess, a little dose of um, suppressed trauma from my own first submission of a paper in grad school, because it sounded a lot like that, and I do actually remember it being referred to as garbage, but I'm assuming the difference here is that mine actually was garbage. It was a terrible paper, and it was the first thing that a colleague and I had submitted. He was a graduate student as well, and we just had no business submitting anything at that point. But at the same time, it was a learning experience for me, and hopefully the paper or writing quality has improved over time. But yeah, I would say my initial reaction is and probably this is in life more generally, is just to get rather defensive at first because I'm being criticized. But typically with papers, in my experience, yeah, the vast majority have been mostly on target. And so when I sit back and think about it a little bit more, I see it as a way to, improve the quality. But I have had a couple where I more or less had to respond to the criticism by addressing it, but not thinking that the changes that I made were actually that necessary. But I would say the norm has been for that to improve my work.
Zara, you want to share an experience here? Since it's your first time, you can accept or decline the challenge.
Yeah, I think that's fine if you don't want to overshare this early.
You want to step in, Anne, for now?
Sure, I can go next.
Oh, wait, it looks like Zara's taking herself off mute. Did you want to share?
Adam, I didn't get your questions. Would you mind if you repeat it? My connection is very poor at that time.
Sure.
The chat, Zara, I put it in the chat,
Let me see.
but you can go ahead and say it, Adam, too.
Yeah, it's just a question about, have you received criticism on your work that at first seemed like it was unfair or off base, and then when you look back, you realize that maybe they did have a point, or maybe there were things that you could have done better?
Let me think. My experience is a little different from a scientific community. First day of my work, I have visited a field farm, and I provided a lot of recommendation for how they work and how they should do everything. But when the farmers gave me their feedbacks, and I knew at that time I should learn a lot of things from those who have more experience in the field than what I learned in books. It's my first criticism that comes from the ones who have experience but not academic knowledge. It's very good for me, at least. I learned from that experience that I should consider the feedbacks from all the people involved in the work. And that's my experience.
So similarly, I can think of hundreds of parenting examples that come to mind, even though I tell my kids I've never been wrong before almost every day, because I haven't. But I can think of one example going back to when I first started environmental consulting work, and I flew to Bismarck, North Dakota to do a drilling operation and in a bunch of groundwater and soil sampling. And I hired some drillers out of Minot, North Dakota, or I'm sorry, out of Grand Forks. So they drove all the way across the state to meet me, and we got there and we were going over all the paperwork to begin drilling, and one of them handed me a drug screen that had a positive hit on it. And I was like, okay, I guess we all go home at this point. We can't be understaffed. It's not safe to drill without a full staff, and you have a positive test. And of course he thinks he's going to be fired, because he probably is. And he argues, I swear, it should be clean. I'm fine. I'm clean. Well, it turned out to be, it was just a very poorly worded lab report. And it turned out to be the positive detection was a substance that meant that he was human. And he really did not have a positive hit on his drug screen. So we moved on, but we lost a half a day because I had to fight with him about using drugs.
I'm muted. Okay, so what we're going to do today is hear from Chris about his interviews. Stacy, you wanted to talk a little bit about setting up a time to discuss the agenda. And we're
Yes.
not going to discuss the agenda today because we're going to leave the rest of the time for Chris, so I don't cut him off like I did before. But people should know that the advisory board that Stacy's been working to schedule has finally been scheduled on the 28th. And so, Stacy, I think you're intending for Ellison and Ryan or Chris to be there, right?
At least two.
At
We
least
want at
two.
least 2 members of the project team to join the meeting. We're getting some good RSVPs right now, so this is good. We've got like 5, and I think that that's excellent. And more are trickling in. I really, just without taking up a lot of time, I think we should meet next week. Anyone who's going to be at the meeting from this team to help just get on the same page about what the agenda will be and what's going to be presented and the feedback questions that we want to ask from the team. That can be either on the 23rd during the Respect team meeting. I think Tammy said she can't be here on the 23rd. So that's something that we could do. It's a meeting time that I know already works for the group, although Ellison isn't here on the call today. Or it could be Thursday or even Wednesday. So I'll just ask Ryan and Chris to send me their availability for a meeting on the 21st, the 22nd, or your preference to meet at this time on the 23rd. Tammy, is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's the survey that Chris is about to present that will be discussed in that community advisory meeting.
Correct.
Okay. Chris, I am going to hand it over to you now, and be sure to get as much, or you're going to present things, but if you want feedback on particular things, of course you can say that too.
Sure. Well, I'll just say right now, Stacy, my preference personally would be just to have that discussion on Friday when we would normally meet, if we're going to meet anyway. But if others have an agenda they wanted to go over during that meeting, then I could certainly try to I would set aside time on another day, but I'll let others weigh in on that as well. All right, so I don't want to be overly repetitive, so I went over this, quickly. I'll go over it in just a bit more depth, but I don't like talking that much. So if you guys want to weigh in with any, questions or want me to discuss anything further, please feel free to, interject at any point. But let's see, so the interviews at least what was approved through the IRB, we're going to be focusing on a few different dimensions, and those dimensions will then of course have several subsets of questions related to them. The first one's going to be looking at the residential history. Ellison had provided some, along with Paige, had provided some feedback on questions that we might ask that look at more or less how their current residence compares to a prior residence. And questions about what they consider home to be and what makes it home. Again, with the goal that will connect to the concept of well-being, and depending on what the response is, that might be one way to get at some rather rich data as it relates to their perspective of well-being from a more subjective standpoint. So what makes it their home? Is this current residence their home? If it's not, where is it, and why? Is that home, or why is this home? So there are some other questions related to that. Then, of course, one of the themes is going to be the actual changes that have occurred. So I guess it's important to preface this by saying that with the first set of homes that we're going to sample from, with the information that Ryan will be providing me, we're going to be more or less focusing on homes where we already know that those changes have occurred, or at least that those changes were applied for. So the questions themselves will look a little bit different once we start sampling from homes that are based a little bit more on prediction about whether, or propensity, I should say, something that we talked about in a meeting a couple weeks ago. But starting off, we'll be looking at homes that have made those changes, and we want to understand how or what their experience has been related to those changes, but not just in terms of sort of the after effect. We also want to focus quite a bit on what brought about that change in the first place. So have the changes themselves been positive or negative? We're wanting to understand how they, frame those experiences. And when they do talk about their experience, it could be interesting to see whether they're focusing on the period in which the installation was actually occurring, or if they're focusing on, again, kind of the after effect, the post-installation period, have the changes themselves been overall positive or negative. Again, we want to know what brought on the change. Was it due to a problem, such as what we've talked about before, the end of life, or maybe there was some other disruption that occurred, or some other trigger, such as just overall a desire to be more environmentally friendly. So we want to try to capture the range of those changes. We want to also look at the people involved in making that decision and what role they played, whether it was a neighbor, a colleague, a spouse, another family member. We want to learn more about whether every decision maker in the home was supportive of those changes. If there was opposition or any kind of hesitation, what were those, what were they from more of a qualitative standpoint? How did they learn about that environmental upgrade? What was their informational source? And again, I should also add that, how they answer these questions is going to be more or less why we're using this semi-structured approach, because of course the responses are expected. We expect them to differ a little bit, and we'll ask follow-up questions that are tailored more toward how they respond to that. So for instance, if the informational source was a contractor, we want to learn more about that experience or that interaction that they had with the contractor. If it was a neighbor, we want to learn more about the neighbor and potentially interview the neighbor as well. But then the decision-making process is something we also want to ask about. So when it was made, who did they reach out to? How did they know? For instance, did they Google someone? Did they, again, find out from their neighbor? Did they use if phone books still exist, did they use that? Who introduced the change? And in terms of making the change, were there any problems in the installation, barriers or obstacles that they were confronted with? Were they satisfied with the change? Again, what were the positives? Have they experienced, even if it was an overall positive experience, were there any negative outcomes? Did they find the change reliable compared to what they had before? Would they do it again? What were their biggest motivators? And another thing I'll add here is that at times during the interview, it will probably sound to the respondent like I'm in a way asking the same question again. And that's actually in a way intentional, because it provides an opportunity for some of that data to be presented in a richer, maybe more elaborate way. Sometimes just asking the same question a little bit differently can provoke a different train of thought. And so my thought is that the more data we have, the better. So if the responses aren't full at one point, maybe they'll be a little bit fuller at another point. And of course, as the interview goes on and they're becoming more comfortable, and their train of thought is maybe a bit more directed, it might again make them add something that they weren't thinking about initially. So let's see. Then we're also going to be asking a little more questions that are a little bit more generally related to well-being. So their indoor environment. And again, it's not intended to reinvent the wheel about what well-being is, but just to get a deeper understanding of how that might connect to the specific changes that they made or are thinking about making. So when they think about their indoor environment, what makes them comfortable? What makes them uncomfortable? When they think about their indoor environment, what makes them feel satisfied? We'll ask them questions about work. Do they have job satisfaction? Do they consider themselves to be in good health? Do they have comfort over their current finances? Do they have control over decisions made in their home? Does their residence contribute to their health quality? Do they believe any illness has been caused by any kind of indoor environment? Is this, again, residence their home? Where is home? There could be other questions, or there will be other questions related to satisfaction in the residence, productivity in their home, emotional connection to their residence, perceptions of their living space. And again, they will sound like very different questions from what we've previously been asking. But again, the hope is to, even if they're not necessarily drawing a direct connection in their responses, hopefully we can be able to connect their idea of well-being to some of the changes that they've made or changes that they're thinking about pursuing. So what else was I going to add here? Just as an update, and maybe Stacy will talk about this a little bit more, but Stacy's already essentially arranged for what could potentially be our first interview if we wanted. There's going to be someone in attendance at the advisory board meeting that has actually made changes, the types of changes that we're going to be looking into. And he's even provided pictures of those, so we know what changes he's made, and lives in Pueblo County, so he would certainly be a qualified candidate. And he can also contribute by looking at the interview guide itself and inform us as to whether we're kind of on the right track here, and maybe think about potential questions that we're not asking that could be asked. So really, that's all I have. And as always, I would welcome any kind of feedback. And in particular, one area that I have been thinking about a little bit more recently, and maybe it was brought on by the interaction that took place in the emails between Stacy and this, I'm already forgetting his first name, Ken.
Oh, Ken.
You know, there are specific changes that can be made to a home that would qualify as an upgrade, like he changed from a cooktop stove to induction. It's not necessarily something that I have been thinking about. It's probably not something that Ryan would know this more than I would, but it's probably not something that needs an approval for in the county. But if we sort of think about all these different changes that could occur that don't need approval for, then that can certainly broaden our network of potential respondents later on, if necessary. You do need an electrical permit. So, yeah. And I'm sorry, what was the question about the illness?
Oh, you mentioned you were going to ask people about in-home illness. Did that get through human subject?
It got, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't, I'm not really sure about that question, only because, of course, it's one of those questions where if they start to, I mean, the way it's phrased in the IRB application is that, respondents don't have to answer every question, just the typical verbiage that you would use. But with that one, I wouldn't anticipate asking any kind of follow-up questions to it. That was something that was added on through feedback, and particularly as it relates to the different dimensions of what well-being constitutes. But I don't anticipate asking any follow-up questions unless, they were to say, well, yeah, we had this aspect of our indoor environment that was very clearly related to an illness, and the doctor said this and that, and we made this change. That could certainly provide fruitful data in that regard. But if they just answer generally about their health, I think that's going to be sufficient. I wouldn't ask many follow-up questions with that.
But if you get a talker, Chris,
Yeah.
to people, the people that want to talk about their health, they really want to talk about their health, right?
Yeah. And I think it will, in that instance, it's just going to sort of depend on I don't want to, I'd hate to, I'm not going to cut them off, but I will wait for a pause and redirect the interview if it clearly doesn't relate to, indoor environment types of issues. But sometimes, just to make people feel comfortable, you also let them, divulge what they want.
Yeah. I was curious if, Kartik, you're looking at a very high level on things that relate to well-being. Did you hear anything that might be missing that you might suggest adding just from your data?
Right. Yeah, I was just going to make a comment. So first thing, yeah, Chris, I really like the additional questions about job satisfaction and health, because I'm also looking at similar variables with our synthetic data set. But another question I had was about choices that people would have to make in the house. So for example, you don't want to make an energy change because you want to pay for food or transportation or, some other causes. So is that something you're considering getting into, or is that not going to be part of this discussion?
Yeah, so choices about their well-being that are essentially alternatives to, in other words, making sacrifices. Is that what you mean by
Right.
focusing on one dimension of well-being as opposed to another?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. I don't have that. I'm sort of looking back at the full interview script, and I don't think that is really worked in there. So I will do it. It's a
Okay.
good idea, and I'll.
And another sort of thing I was thinking about is outdoor environment, because you did mention a lot of indoor factors, but are you also considering outdoors fact, including, for example, I don't know, air quality, or even just your connection to the community, or your connection or your neighborhood quality and things like that? Is that something you're also thinking about, or not really?
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time? I was typing out the.
Oh, yeah. So I was just talking about factors outside the house. So
Yeah.
it could be like environmental factors, which
Okay.
would be, air quality or access to different resources, and other things like just neighborhood quality. So yeah, how good stuff around your house is, and also how connected you feel to your community, or just socially how connected you are. So things like that.
Yeah, so far, I would say that our questions haven't been designed around that, in part because of the focus on the indoor part. But if others feel like the outdoor scope of well-being should be examined as well, I'm again more than comfortable creating some questions around that.
So I
put this
think
in
it's hard, right? Because if we
Yeah.
ask about everything, then the interview will be 24 hours long. I guess here's what people think about this, but I feel like if they have a major influence on well-being that is dominating their consciousness, that it's going to feel weird to talk about other aspects that are not feeling as important. And yet you don't want to ask about everything. Like, is there a way to do something like, is there anything at your top of mind? Or I don't know how to do that, but a way to get if there's something that's really very present for them without having to ask about everything.
I tend to think people are going to want to are going to talk about what they want to talk about. So like if there's something else that'll come up, like that's been my experience with interviews, is like if someone wants to talk about something, they find a way to get it in there. I also think for the outside characteristics, that's one of the things I've been including. I've been working on like refining that pairing thing we talked about, but that like we'd be able to pick houses across different neighborhoods. So even if we're not asking about that, we should be able to like post hoc analyze if we think that's driving results, and then we could adjust accordingly.
Anne's got a hand up.
Yeah, just kind of a general question, like might be, how invested do you feel in your home? Are you going to stay there for 30 more years? And how invested do you feel in your community? I mean, if you're about to sell your house, you're not really going to, unless it's going to increase your home value, just that.
Yeah, I'll add that as well. and that certainly does relate to the overall idea of one's well-being. And I should have mentioned one other question that we're going to be, or series of questions that we'll be working in, relate to what Narasima brought up a couple weeks ago when we were sort of running out of time. He had suggested that we also focus quite a bit on asking, and this is somewhat related to what Kartik was talking about as well, with sacrifices, but why they didn't pursue other particular changes. So in other words, you know, why did they install a new furnace and not a heat pump? Is it, again, due to a particular concern they have with a heat pump? Is it due to lack of knowledge about heat pumps more generally? Those types of questions we'll certainly be working in as well.
Any other questions for Chris or comments? I think there's going to be a little bit of opportunity to talk about this next week too, just as we present or think about presenting to the group that Stacy's putting together. So even though it won't be a direct comment on the interview, that's still going to be the topic.
There's just a small question about sociodemographics. Would you be collecting that data? Would you be inferring that information, or Ryan, would you have that information already from the housing records or somewhere? Just like, number of people in the house size, and things like that.
We can't get it like well, we could probably get it like how many adults are in a house, but I think it's more complex than we'd want to do. I think like when I was thinking outside characteristics, I was thinking more like proximity to parks, major.
Oh yeah,
traffic
that too.
areas,
Oh yeah,
like that.
oh that too. This is a separate question about what sociodemographics of the house, of people in the house, would you have?
Oh, so I think for that we'll have to use like block group level estimates, essentially similar to what you're doing with your survey stuff.
I see. Okay.
That would probably be a good thing to make explicit. As much as we can. I realize that we can go back and fill it in later with block group estimates, but the more we can clarify what we all think we're doing and what data we think we're going to have, the better off we're going to be. Okay, is there anything else? I want to close the meeting soon. And then briefly, Zara, I probably should have done this at the beginning, but what we're talking about here is the team is using different ways of getting at the notion of well-being and making change to move toward changes that assist energy transitions. So you're going to be coming at it from a data side. You'll hear from Kartik in a couple of weeks. He's coming at it from a data side. And what Chris and Ryan are doing is the very qualitative side and hearing from people. So we're triangulating on these kinds of transitions and how people feel about them.
Thank you for the information. I gathered from the talking of the team members. I gathered that Kartik, as he said, working on machine learning, I believe the data science side, and what the Chris said, I gathered that he worked on the qualitative sides. Yes, thank you for the information.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a really good weekend. All right, see you later. Bye.